The afternoon was quiet in the small Ohio house where Vivian Cole lived alone. The light from the window stretched across the kitchen floor, touching a pile of folded laundry and a simmering pot of chicken soup. It was Ryan's favorite, a recipe she had made since he was little. He used to say it tasted like home. Now, he lived in the city with Olivia, and the only time he mentioned her cooking was to joke that it smelled old-fashioned. Vivian brushed it off, the way mothers do when love makes excuses. She added a pinch of dill and stirred slowly, trying to ignore the dull pressure in her chest. It had started earlier, a faint tightness that refused to leave. She told herself it was just fatigue. 66 wasn't young, but she still moved like a woman who believed she had to keep going. The towels needed folding. The soup needed stirring. Everything had to be done before she could rest. Then the spoon slipped from her fingers. The sound of metal on tile echoed too loud in the empty kitchen. Her knees buckled. The floor came fast. A sharp, cold pain spread through her left arm as she tried to breathe. She reached for the counter but missed. Her cheek met the tile. The world narrowed to light, breath, and fear. Her hand fumbled for the phone. She pressed the first name on her list, Ryan. It rang twice. "Hey, Mom," his voice came through, bright and distracted. In the background she heard laughter, plates clinking, music celebration. "Ryan," she managed, her breath shallow. "Something's wrong, I think." His tone shifted only slightly. "Mom, it's Olivia's birthday, we just sat down. Can I call you tomorrow?" There was a pause, the kind of silence that measures distance. Vivian whispered, "I think I need an ambulance." He sighed, annoyed. "Then call 911, Mom. That's what they're for." The line went dead. The phone slipped from her hand. The soup boiled over. Somewhere outside, a car passed and everything went still again. She lay there on the floor, the air thick and cold, realizing the truth that would change everything. Her son had chosen dinner over his mother. Vivian woke to a wash of white light and the sterile hum of machines. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal. She blinked until shapes formed walls, curtains, nurses moving with quiet urgency. A voice spoke from somewhere above her head, calm but distant. "Mrs. Cole, you're at Cleveland Memorial. You collapsed at home. The ambulance got to you just in time." She tried to remember who had called them. Her mind replayed the moment, the fall, the call, the click of the phone. Ryan's voice still echoed light, distant, impatient. She looked at the door, expecting it to open, but it didn't. Hours passed. A nurse came in, checked her vitals, smiled kindly. "Is someone coming to see you?" she asked softly. Vivian shook her head. "No one's coming." The nurse nodded as if she already knew. Vivian turned her eyes to the ceiling. The beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence. It reminded her of lullabies she used to hum when Ryan was small. Back then, he never wanted to fall asleep alone. She would sit beside his bed until his breathing steadied. Now, years later, she lay in a hospital bed alone, her own breathing shallow and unsteady, with no one to stay by her side. She closed her eyes and drifted through memories like channels flipping in her mind. When Ryan crashed his first car, she took the blame. When he missed rent, she paid it. When Olivia lost her job, Vivian quietly covered their bills. Each time she told herself it was what mothers do, hold the world together so their children don't have to. But that night in the hospital, she began to wonder, who holds the mother when she falls apart? The nurse returned, adjusted the IV, and whispered, "Try to rest, sweetheart." Vivian nodded, though her eyes stayed open, fixed on the door. No footsteps came. No voice said, "Mom, I'm here." The machines kept their rhythm, steady and indifferent. The heart might have been healing, but the ache inside her chest was not. Somewhere between the hum of fluorescent lights and the cold of the sheets, Vivian understood the truth she had refused for years. Love, when it goes unanswered, begins to fade without noise or ceremony. Morning light crept through the hospital blinds, thin and colorless. Vivian hadn't slept. The doctor entered with a clipboard, his tone gentle but brisk. "You experienced an episode of atrial fibrillation, Miss Cole. It's manageable, but you'll need rest and less stress." Rest, less stress. The words almost made her laugh. What could be heavier than years of carrying someone else's burdens? She nodded anyway, the polite kind of nod women learn after decades of being told to stay calm. When the room emptied, she stared at the ceiling and thought about Ryan's voice. It hadn't been cruel, just careless, effortless. That was what hurt the most. He hadn't meant to wound her, he simply didn't think she mattered enough to stop dinner for, and somehow that made it worse. Her mind sifted through 1,000 small moments she'd brushed aside. The time Olivia wrinkled her nose at Vivian's homemade pie and said, "We don't really eat those old-style desserts." The way Ryan laughed, embarrassed instead of defending her. The birthdays he forgot, the phone calls that came only when he needed money. The polite were just so busy that excused everything. All of it had stacked quietly inside her, unnoticed, unspoken. And now, lying in a sterile bed under a blank ceiling, she could finally see the pattern. It wasn't one bad night, it was a lifetime of being useful, not loved. Vivian reached for the small notepad the volunteer had left beside her bed. Her hands trembled slightly as she wrote, not a diary entry but a plan. 3 lines in careful script. 1. Call my lawyer. 2. Review accounts. 3. Change the locks. She set the pen down and exhaled. It wasn't rage. It wasn't bitterness. It was clarity, the kind that arrives when the noise finally stops and all that's left is truth. For the first time in years, Vivian wasn't thinking about how to make Ryan's life easier. She was thinking about her own. The following afternoon, Vivian returned home. The cab driver carried her small overnight bag to the porch and wished her well. Inside, the air felt stale, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. The broken bowl still lay on the kitchen floor, a dried circle of soup beneath the table. Vivian stood there for a long moment, staring at the mess, until she realized it looked exactly how she felt: split, spilled, forgotten. She knelt carefully, her joints stiff but steady. One by one, she gathered the shards, placing them into a trash bag. When the floor was clean, she washed her hands, turned on the kettle, and opened her laptop. The list she'd written in the hospital sat beside her. She read it again. Then she began. The first call went to her lawyer, Mr. Lewis. "Miss Cole," he said kindly, "how are you feeling?" "Better," she answered, "and ready to make some changes." She told him to remove Ryan's name from the will and cancel all trust distributions immediately. There was a pause on the line, the quiet of a man who'd heard many kinds of heartbreak, but knew better than to ask questions. He simply said, "I'll prepare the documents." The second task was financial. Vivian logged into her accounts, canceled the automatic rent transfer Ryan had relied on for months, and halted the payments she'd been making toward their credit card. Each click felt like undoing a knot tied years ago. The third task was small but symbolic. She opened the drawer by the front door and found the spare key Ryan used to let himself in without knocking. Attached was his old apartment key, from a place he hadn't lived in for 3 years. He never updated it because he never needed to. She'd always open the door. Vivian slipped the keys into a small envelope and wrote on it in neat letters, "Return to sender." She placed it in the mailbox for the afternoon pickup. By the time the kettle whistled, the kitchen was spotless again. She poured herself a cup of tea, sat down at the table, and listened to the silence. For once, it didn't sound lonely. It sounded clean. The next day, as sunlight faded through the blinds, a soft knock echoed at Vivian's door. She didn't need to look to know who it was. People like Ryan always came one day late, when guilt felt bearable and excuses sounded polished. Through the curtain, she saw him standing on the porch, holding a bouquet of white lilies. His shirt was crisp, his smile rehearsed. She opened the door just enough to see his face. "Mom," he began cheerfully, "I came as soon as I could. Olivia threw a surprise dinner last night, and you know how it is, I couldn't just leave." Vivian said nothing. The pause unsettled him. "I brought your favorite flowers," he added, holding them out. "You love lilies." She didn't take them. "I'm not taking visitors today." Ryan blinked, caught off guard. "What, Mom? I drove all the way here." "I didn't ask you to," she said, her voice steady. He frowned, confusion hardening into irritation. "You're being dramatic. I already told you we were celebrating. It was one night." That word dramatic fell heavy between them. He had used it before, every time she asked for something small. A call, a visit, a little help. When she said she missed him, dramatic. When she said Olivia's words hurt her, dramatic. When she asked him to care, dramatic. Vivian looked at him, really looked. He wasn't cruel, he was simply comfortable with her pain. "No, Ryan," she said quietly. "I'm not being dramatic, I'm being clear." For a moment, the air seemed to hold its breath. He opened his mouth, searching for the right defense, but none came. He tried again. "So you're shutting me out over one bad night?" "It wasn't one night," she said. "It was every night you didn't call, Every birthday you forgot. Every time I was a convenience instead of a mother. Ryan's hand tightened around the bouquet. The lilies trembled. He looked smaller now, unsure. She didn't raise her voice. She simply closed the door, gentle but final. The latch clicked a quiet sound, yet it echoed louder than any argument could have. The silence after the door closed was heavy, but it was hers. For the first time, Vivian didn't rush to smooth things over. She made tea, sat by the window and watched Ryan's car pull away. He didn't look back. That night, the calls began. First Ryan, then Olivia. Vivian let them ring. The next morning, Olivia's voice filled the voicemail box, polite at first, then sharp. He feels terrible, Vivian. You can't just cut him off over one bad moment. Her tone softened to a sigh. Families fight, but you don't burn bridges over one mistake. One mistake. Vivian almost laughed. It wasn't one. It was 1,000 small cuts, and this time, she wasn't going to bleed quietly. More messages followed. Ryan's voice, frustrated now, Mom, this is unfair. You're blowing things out of proportion. Katie, he caught himself, Olivia's been crying for days. We're worried about you. Vivian knew the rhythm well, guilt dressed up as concern. Then came the texts. Dad would have been disappointed. You're the one tearing this family apart. We've always supported you, and this is how you repay us. But none of them said the words that mattered. I'm sorry I didn't come. That absence said everything. They didn't miss her. They missed her usefulness. Vivian deleted the messages one by one. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was steady, like air returning after a storm. She realized how much energy she had spent managing other people's emotions, patching every hole they created. Now the holes could stay. They weren't hers to fix. By evening, she'd stopped checking her phone. The kettle hissed softly. The house, though quiet, didn't feel hollow anymore. It simply felt honest. 3 days passed before anyone came to the door again. The sun was warm that morning, the kind that made the air shimmer over the sidewalks. Vivian had gone for a slow walk around the neighborhood, her first since the hospital. She moved carefully, but with purpose. Each step felt lighter than the one before. Halfway down the block, she saw her neighbor, Mrs. Klein, tending to her garden. The woman looked up, wiped her hands on her apron, and smiled. How are you feeling, dear? We were worried. Vivian hesitated. Better, she said honestly. Mrs. Klein studied her a moment before speaking again. You know, she said, lowering her voice, some people don't deserve your loyalty. It's all right to walk away. Then she went back to her roses as if she hadn't just handed over the permission Vivian never knew she needed. Back home, the house no longer felt like a museum of old memories. It was just space, quiet, open, waiting. She sat at the table and opened her phone. Dozens of unread messages waited, blinking like warnings. She selected them all and pressed delete. Next, she dialed the hospital. I'd like to update my emergency contact information, she told the receptionist. Yes, of course. Who should we list? Me, Vivian said. Just me. When she hung up, a strange calm settled over her. The same kind she used to feel after finishing a long day of teaching, tired but fulfilled. She walked into the spare room that had always been kept ready for Ryan and Olivia. The bed was made, sheets tucked tight, as if waiting for guests who never came. Vivian opened the window. Fresh air swept in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked grass. She stripped the bed, folded the sheets, and boxed up the photos that lined the shelves. Birthdays, graduations, forced smiles. She didn't throw them away, just moved them aside. Then she set a small plant on the windowsill, placed a notebook on the desk, and sat down to write the first sentence of a new story. The day I stopped being his mother was the day I became myself. That evening the rain returned, gentle at first, then steady, tapping against the window beside Vivian's chair. She wrapped her hands around a cup of tea and let the steam rise to her face. The house, once filled with noise and expectation, now held only the rhythm of rain and her own breathing. When the mail arrived the next morning, a small envelope rested on top of the pile. No return address. Inside was a simple card written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. I saw you at the hospital that night. You were sitting alone in the waiting room. You offered me a blanket while I waited for my mother. You told me I wasn't alone. You mattered to a stranger. I thought you should know. Vivian read it twice, her eyes blurred, not from sadness but from something softer, recognition. Maybe life had a way of returning kindness when you least expected it. She placed the card in the drawer beside her bed. Later that day, another message came from Ryan, just one line. "I don't know who you are anymore." Vivian smiled. For the first time in her life, she agreed with him. She didn't know this woman either, not the one who begged for love or waited for calls. This new version of herself was quieter, stronger, and finally at peace. She looked around her living room, the books stacked neatly, the single vase of lilies she bought for herself, the sound of rain soft against the glass. Nothing felt empty, it felt complete. Vivian took a deep breath and whispered to the quiet, "I'm finally home." Then, as if speaking to every woman who had ever given too much, she added in her heart, "You don't have to earn love, you don't have to prove your worth. Sometimes walking away is the beginning of coming home to yourself." Days turned into weeks, and peace became a routine. Vivian found herself waking earlier, not because she had to, but because mornings finally felt like hers. She brewed her coffee, opened the window, and watched the sun spill over the quiet neighborhood. There was no sound of her phone ringing, no buzzing notifications, and no sense of waiting for anyone. She began to write daily, little reflections at first, memories of her students, stories about the seasons, thoughts she'd never had time to think before. Some days she wrote about forgiveness, other days about the art of letting go. Her words didn't seek pity. They sought freedom. Neighbors stopped by occasionally, offering cookies or conversation. Vivian welcomed them kindly, but she never filled the silence just to avoid it. She had learned that quiet was not loneliness, it was healing. One afternoon, she sat on the porch, a gentle breeze brushing her hair, the same porch where she had once waited for Ryan's car to pull into the driveway. Now, she watched the world without expectation. A group of children played down the street, their laughter echoing softly, reminding her that life keeps moving, even after heartbreak. Vivian smiled, her heart steady, her soul unburdened. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't need revenge in the way people imagined. Her revenge was peace, boundaries, and self-respect, the kind that no one could take away again. As the screen fades, her voice lingers, calm and clear. If you've ever felt invisible, remember this: you are seen, you are enough, and you are allowed to start over, no matter how long it takes. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to The Art of Revenge, where every story reminds us that the quietest strength is the one that never needs to shout.